Welcome to another Spirit of Aviation Week interview. I'm Steve Buss, chairman of Interview Circle at EIA AirVenture Oshkosh, and please join me in welcoming from his home, Norm DeWitt, member of the EIA Board of Directors, home builder, and aerobatic pilot. Welcome, Norm.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you, Steve.
As well, and we are talking about the spirit of aviation and kind of enjoying all things that have to do with airplanes, including aerobatics. We're going to talk about aerobatics a little later in this interview, but right now I'd like to know what your inspiration to actually get into the cockpit, where that inspiration came from.
I'd say it really came from my Uncle Dick, who was a World War II B-25 bomber pilot. And he was shot down over Germany and got the pleasure of spending 18 months in a German prison camp. And then when he came back home, my mother tells me he would walk me on the boardwalk in Atlantic City in a bassinet or a stroller or whatever we call those things then. And so the flying inspiration had to have come from him because nobody else in my family flew then or now, for that matter, too.
What was the first airplane you soloed?
My first airplane was a Cherokee 140. I got a summer's job at the Palo Alto, California airport between my sophomore and junior year in college. And I pumped fuel, and it's pretty expensive to get a pilot's license or solo back then. Just to give you a feeling, even though I worked for this company at the time, I had to pay $7 an hour for the Cherokee 140 and $3 an hour for the flight instructor. So I think my whole private license cost me $700 plus or minus. Has it changed since then?
The ratios have changed, but it still can be a little pricey on the wallet from time to time. But one of the great things we're going to do this week is actually have a forum on affordable flying. So there are affordable ways to get into it, including pumping gas and washing airplanes for in exchange for flight time.
Well, I'm going to attend that. I want to find an affordable way to fly.
Now, you mentioned being in college. You're a graduate of Notre Dame and also hold an MBA from Santa Clara University out in California. And you have probably had one of the most interesting careers I could think of. You are part of the computer industry from almost the early days, the late 60s. For many years, you worked for IBM.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. First of all, working for IBM, and then the evolution of computers and how they just come to dominate and become an almost indispensable portion of our lives. Well,
I really never thought back in those days that I would go to work with computers or IBM. But bottom line, I thought that maybe sometime in my future I might like to run my own business. And if I did, I wanted to have experience in computers, in sales, in manufacturing, and there was a fourth thing which escapes me right now. But bottom line, I chose IBM because I felt I could get the computer experience and the sales experience in my first job. And actually, I became early on a little bit of a manufacturing expert as far as the use of computers in optimizing your costs, and also my territory back in those days was what was then called Silicon Valley. So I had a lot of interesting sales calls in that area.
Were you able to keep flying while you were working at IBM and throughout your career?
Pretty much, yes. Actually, I spent about maybe a year with IBM, and then the Army requested my presence. And so I went into the Army for 2 years. I was fortunate enough to receive a direct commission because they needed people that could teach computer skills to other officers in the Army. So I was stationed at Fort Ben Harrison in Indianapolis, Indiana, and back in those days, no North Vietnamese got by us, because had they gotten by us, it would have been clear sailing all the way to Notre Dame, and they could have captured Golden Dome. So that's how I started.
And as you were after your time with the Army, when did you get into flying both tail draggers and aerobatics?
Okay. After the Army, I used the GI Bill benefits that came with having served for 2 years, which were very nice. And I think, gosh, if I think back, I think, I had $7,000 worth of credit for flight training beyond a private pilot's license. So I got a commercial, an instrument, a multi, a DC-3 type rating, glider rating, seaplane rating, all those on the GI Bill. And so that really got me off in running as far as flying goes. As far as the flying within IBM, they didn't particularly encourage it. If you did elect to fly someplace on your own, they would reimburse you commercial airfare, which, was fine. I didn't mind that.
Norm, tell us a little bit about how you got into aerobatic flying.
Okay, I need to insert a few things in my flying background before I can get to that. And one of them was that in 1980, I purchased an experimental home built, very easy. I didn't build it. It was built by a young man, and it was one of the early very easies that was ever built. Anyway, I was very interested in the design, and I bought it so my wife and I could inexpensively fly on weekends and make a 2-day weekend into effectively a 3-day weekend by not having to drive a long ways. And about a month after I had the airplane, I was informed that there was going to be 3 of us instead of 2, and that kind of spoiled things as far as going on these weekends. And what happened was I had it very easy for, gosh, I don't know, 6 or 8 years, and I found that I flew it by myself all the time, and went over the coast and chased seagulls or whatever, but it was basically straight and level. And so I decided, look, if this is how the majority of my flying is going to turn out, I'd like to be doing some aerobatics, along the way. My degree from Notre Dame was in aeronautical engineering, and at the time I graduated, I could have designed a missile or a rocket or a jet aircraft, but had you asked me to build it, I wouldn't have known what the heck to do. I had 0 building skills. So on a weekend, like on a Saturday, I went down to Frank Christensen's Kristen Industries location, which was in outside of Watsonville at that time, and took the plant tour. And so he had a Kristen Eagle in various stages, or several of them really, the parts in various stages of assembly. And the more he looked at him, I said, geez, I could do that. It's just going to take time. And so bottom line, I bought my first kit, and I said, well, I'll build kit 1. If I like it, I'll get kit 2. If I don't like it, I'll just stop right there. Well, I liked it and kept on building it. And 8 years and 2,500 hours later, I had a Kristen Eagle. And I then had to find an instructor that would teach me the basic aerobatic skills, which I did. And he said, I'm going to do this with you on one condition, Norm. And the condition is that I'm going to have you do these to competition standards in case you ever go compete. And I said, well, I didn't build this plane to go to compete. I just wanted to go out on my own and fly around and upside down or whatever. So anyway, I went through about 10 hours with him and did all the basic inside maneuvers that you basically learn. And then about a year later, I said, well, what the heck, I'm going to go to a contest and, see if I like this. And so I practiced the sportsman sequence and went to this contest down in the southern part of the San Joaquin Valley. And lo and behold, I won the sportsman category in that first contest. So the hook was set. And, I met a lot of neat people. I had a lot of fun, and I kept going to other contests. And, you basically have the same people at all these contests, so you get to know them pretty well. And let's see how I can end this thing quickly. But after about a year and a half, I said, I've been doing reasonably well. position-wise in these contests. Maybe this is a sport I could do well at. And I said, well, I better set some goals, first of all. So I did. The first goal was to be national champion, and in unlimited, not sportsman. But and then, that starts you down a path saying, well, if I want to be national champion, I was 50 years old at the time. How am I going to do that? What are going to be the obstacles? And one of them would have been the airplane. The Kristen Eagle that I built just didn't have the capability to go beyond advanced. And so I ordered an Edge 540, and then along with some other pilots out here, we would hire the best coaching talent we could find in the world and have them come out and coach us, and then go to these contests around the United States. So that's how I got into it. And don't ask me any more long questions, but that's it.
Well, for those who don't know or haven't had a good background in aerobatics, or in most general public at least think of aerobatics as only air shows, but there is a completely different series of aerobatic flying, and that is competition. And describe a little bit the different categories and some of the maneuvers and things that you work through in each of those.
Well, the categories, first of all, there are 5 categories. And, if you just start out, you can pick any one of the 5, but most of them will start either in the basic category or sportsman. And if you do basic, I think you'll be there 1 or 2 contests, and then you'll move up to sportsman anyway. Then there's intermediate, advanced, and unlimited beyond that. And you're not forced to move up. You can compete in one category for your whole life if you so choose. But, many are challenged category by category and want to move up and improve their skills and in fact do so. And, the highest is probably to earn a position on either the advanced team for world contest flying or the unlimited team. And so that's what you do. And then you fly in what we refer to as the aerobatic box. And this is a 1 kilometer cube piece of airspace from ground level up to 3,500 feet. And in the sportsman category, you can't go below 1,500 feet. And I won't go through each category, but the unlimited category, you can go down to 250 feet because, you're more experienced and aren't going to hurt yourself. Let's put it that way. And then you've got judges, and usually you've got a panel of 5 judges that are watching your every move. And so every figure that you fly has what we call a K factor, or a degree of difficulty. And it's kind of like diving, the diving sport, where if you did a jackknife, that's got a K of something. And then if you got a 10 on it, the points you'd earn would be 10 times the K value. Same thing in aerobatics. And then the person with the highest number of points at a contest wins that category.
As a competitor, how do you judge the box? This is something that's always fascinated me with aerobatic competition. Is, as a pilot, how do you judge where the box is? Well,
we have box markers on the ground. And they're basically L-shaped markers with equal length legs, and they're at the 4 corners of the box. So they're 1 kilometer on a side, and we usually have 2 corner judges that will sit at opposite corners that will see whether or not you flew outside of the box. The other 5 judges are basically at the center box and are watching you fly right and left in front of them, or back and forth too. Some of the maneuvers can go that way.
And I know you also spent time as a judge, not only as a competitor, but as a judge. And as you're sitting on the ground, how challenging is it to rate those maneuvers, especially as they're coming, one after another?
Well, the judge is sitting there with 2 other people. One is called a assistant judge, and that person's responsibility is to call the maneuver that's coming up next. So that as the judge, you're looking at the aircraft basically the whole time. You're not looking down at a card, although you could be. And then the third person is called a recorder, and they record any comments I might make on that maneuver as to what was done well or not so well, and then my score. So, basically you sit there in a chair and you look up and get a stiff neck doing this, but you watch all the competitors fly each of the maneuvers they have in their sequence.
And then from that, you obviously get your totals and first, second, third, fourth, whatever place for each of the pilots.
Well, the score sheets go into a scoring room, and a computer does all the scoring, and that's what happens.
Did being a judge help you in your aerobatic flying as well?
Yes. First of all, I think if nothing else, you get to meet other people on the judging line that maybe aren't competitors flying, and that's important. And you certainly have to go to a judging class before you become a judge, and even you have to have X number of judging experiences before you become a national judge, which I became after about a year in this. And it helps you because you can see mistakes that other competitors are doing, and of course, if you're being coached, the coach tells you the mistakes you're making. In fact, if you like getting compliments on your flying, don't go to this sport, because all you get are, "Oh, you really screwed that one up, Norm. Let's do that again. So let's do the maneuver again." But yeah, it helps you, and you might also, let's just say score a maneuver a 9, and the other judges scored it a 4. Well, you might go to those judges and say, "Hey, what did I miss on that? What did you see that I didn't see?" And early on as a judge, you're not going to see everything. You've got to have judged a lot of people before you before they can sneak something by you.
We're talking with Norm DeWitt, who's a member of the EAA Board of Directors. We also know now that he is a home builder and an aerobatic pilot. You built the Christian Eagle 2, correct? That was
Yes.
The Eagle that you built. Have you built anything since then?
No.
Too busy flying.
Okay, I guess I'm going to say this, and then it'll probably be the last day on the board. But I only had to build one airplane to know that I didn't need to do another one. That was enough. I'm a pilot, not a builder.
There you go. That's one of the best pieces of advice that I received from Joe Norris of EAA staff at the time. And I was at a builder's workshop, and he said, if you're not in love with the process of building, if you're building to fly, you're going to be disappointed. If you enjoy building, this is for you. If you enjoy flying, then go fly and have fun. There's room in this aviation world for all of us.
Well, as you look back, or as I look back, I'm very glad that I built an airplane and went through that process, because when you get into it, there's just more things to do than you ever imagined. And what you really got to do is not think about building an airplane, but you're going to build a wing rib tonight, or cut gussets for a wing rib, and you're going to glue tomorrow night. And so you really got to think small, and then down the road, all 40 wing ribs are built, and they now go on some spars. And pretty soon, all this work that you've done starts to look like an airplane. And you learn a lot of different building skills, working with fiberglass or fabric or sheet metal. So it was a great experience. But make sure you're into the experience, and then when it's done, now you can worry about flying.
There you go. You mentioned earlier your transition from the biplane to the single edge, or single wing, the Edge 540. That's kind of a trend that happened in the aerobatic community from the 70s, moving forward. What was the real cause of that transition from the biplane to the single wing?
Well, I have others in the IAC that could be probably more eloquent on the exact history, but in the 80s, I believe it was, the Russians came out with the Sukhoi line of airplanes, and it had a lot of power. It had, it was a monoplane, and the thing could just go vertical for 2,500 feet with no problem whatsoever. Well, if you were flying a biplane with all the rigging in between, you've got a lot of drag in that type of an airplane. And then also each and every year, certainly at the top level, the difficulty increases. And so sooner or later, you need that. You need all that vertical capability. You need high roll rates. I mean, like the Sukhoi or the Edge that I see pictured here. I mean, this airplane had a roll rate of 420 degrees a second, not a minute, and you could fly this either at 60 knots or 200 knots with that many fingers. I mean, it was just, and it felt, the same. The ailerons didn't get heavier
right,
as the speed increased. So it was a very delicate, in control airplane. And yet, the wings on this airplane were static tested to plus or minus 23 Gs. So, and it's very light. It's lighter than a Cessna 150 with about 400 horsepower on it. So that's why the monoplanes have, kind of come to take over, particularly the upper end of the sport.
Right.
As you're getting in, a lot of people will start with a Decathlon or a Citabria or a Pitts or airplanes such as that. But if they're serious and they want to see how far they can go, they're going to have to get into another airplane.
You mentioned the IAC, the International Aerobatic Club. When did you get involved with IAC?
Well, IAC controls all the contests in the United States. So if you want to compete, you got to be a member of the IAC. And in order to be a member of the IAC, you got to be a member of the EAA. So I don't know, there's some inbreeding here, I guess. But my first contest was in 1995, and so I had joined actually IAC probably in the 80s because I was interested in the magazine and the builder's tips and things that you would get, just from being associated with a group that, is passionate about aerobatics.
Definitely. And you've also served on the IAC Board of Directors as well.
Yes, I have. Yeah, I spent 15 years on the board and retired last year as a director emeritus.
There we go.
They doubled my salary too.
Excellent. Well, thank you for serving IAC for so many years. And IAC is celebrating their 50th year this year, 2020. So founded in 1970. During your tenure and as a member, what are some of the maybe major highlights that you can recall from IAC's history?
Major memories of that. Well, I think, first of all, at least, and this would be from my side too, that having an international contest in the United States was a highlight because we don't get to do it in very much. And the reason being that most of the international competitors don't live in the United States. They live across the ocean on the other side of the world. Well, not quite the other side, but, over in Europe. And it costs, in round numbers, $50,000 for an individual pilot in the United States to get his or her airplane across the ocean and compete in a contest and then get the plane back. So having one of those contests in the United States, and we finally had a rule put in where at least once every 10 years there had to be an international contest in the United States, which meant that the Europeans would have to come over here. And so that was fun. I got to fly in an unlimited contest in 2003, and then I was on the advanced team in 2007, and that was up in Pendleton, Oregon. So that was certainly fun. And I'm not sure I put it in my biography or anything, but for better part of 10 years, I was in charge of the fundraising organization for the unlimited team, and working with those guys and gals and getting them ready to go to a world contest and get their planes over there, get trained, and all that kind of stuff was a thrill. We're all very close as a result.
I'm sure. There must be a lot of logistics that went into being able to move the team and the aircraft across the ocean for that competition. How did you keep all the details straight?
Well, I didn't have to keep them all straight, but before it was my watch, we used to be able to have the Air Force fly all the planes over at one time on a C-5. And then under, I think, the first Bush's presidency, that ended. And so now each team member had to come up with how they were going to get their plane over there, or they had to have a contact over in Europe where they would rent an aerobatic plane over there, in which case they, didn't have to move one over. But I don't think you're going to win a world contest if you're not flying your own airplane.
Right. And as you mentioned, you were on the aerobatic team in 2007. Tell us a little bit about that experience, flying in the competition.
Well, that was held up, as I said a moment ago, in Pendleton, Oregon, which is kind of in the northeastern part of the state. It's a high desert, and the aerobatic club up there has a beautiful aerobatic box, and the town is really a nice place to have a contest, because there's not many people living in homes right nearby that you disturb with all the noise we're making. But anyway, we must have had about 40 to 50 contestants from around the world compete in that. And at that time, there were limits on the airplane that you could use to compete in the contest. And so the edge that I had had too much performance. They wouldn't allow that plane to be used in the contest. So I had to share a plane with a friend. But like I said, if you're not flying your own airplane, I don't care how much time you have in your friend's airplane, it's different.
With the aerobatic championships, when is the next one scheduled?
Well, there's usually one every year.
Okay.
So like the advanced championships will be actually every other year, and then the unlimited in the interim years. So There's either an advanced or an unlimited championship someplace in the world every year.
All right. Is it still on track for this year?
That's a great question. I don't know, and I would doubt it.
All right. Well, like AirVenture, we'll reset for 2021. How about that?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are going to have to do that.
I think so. Norm, now we talked a little bit about IAC and your competition flying. Are there any? You mentioned a group that you got together with in California when you started. Were there any mentors or coaches that kind of stand out as helping you along throughout your aerobatic career?
There were several, and you're going to put me on the spot. I'll try to remember all the names, and if they're going to watch this in the future and I forget them, please forgive me. But Alan Geringer down in Selma, California, was the first coach that I used, and Alan was very instrumental in helping me move to the upper categories. And then, one of our contestants, Vicki Cruz, who used to be president of IAC, she and I became very close friends, and we came to the conclusion that if we wanted to do well nationally, we needed to travel around the country so people got to know us, and then we also needed to get the best coaching we could get. So we used coaches such as Nikolai Timofeev, who's a former Russian team member and lives down in Florida, Sergei Boryak, who lives near Washington, D.C., and he was also a Russian team member. And both of them are great coaches. Nikolai coaches with one eye, one eye watching you, the other eye on a camera. And he calls this Paramount Pictures, because oftentimes, the coach will say, "Norm, you screwed this up." And I said, "No, I didn't. I did that right." He says, "No, come over to Paramount Pictures. We'll show you." And so anyway, he had backup to any mistake that I made that I didn't believe I made. And then a few times we used Victor Smolin, who's been the Russian team coach for, I don't know, probably 20 or 25 years now. And he too is an excellent coach. I mean, a coach not only has to, it's an interesting set of skills in that the coach needs to watch you fly, tell you what you're doing wrong, and then tell you how to fix it. So, he's got to be able to, be in the cockpit with you although he's not. He's on the ground. And he also has to have the eye of a judge, you know. And Victor Smolin, I think, was maybe a gold medal winner back in the 80s from Russia. And I'll tell you, I'll pass along one saying that he had that I think there's a huge amount of depth and truth to. And he said, aerobatics is nothing more than knowing where to look and what you're supposed to see. And I could elaborate on that with other examples. I won't, but if people watching can remember that and think about it, and I'll even expand it. I would say flying is nothing more than knowing where to look and what you're supposed to see. And so think about, learning to land, an airplane for the first time. Your instructor needs to tell you where to look, what you're supposed to see, and what you're doing wrong, what you're doing right. And let's see, there have been a couple more. John Morrissey's another U.S. coach out of, coaches in Kansas at least. So I've worked with John, and now we also have worked with several of the unlimited pilots too, like Debbie Reen Harvey, three-time U.S. national champion. So oftentimes we'd get the best of the best to come out and work with us. And I know I'm forgetting somebody, and when I remember, I'm going to interrupt and come back. But
okay. You mentioned a lot of the Russian names, the coaches and pilots, and I would think, and maybe this is just an assumption on my part, but that aviation is sort of a universal language. That when you go to these international competitions, you're all sharing the same language, you're doing the same thing. So it kind of breaks down the barriers between the countries.
I'd say that's definitely true. And most, but not all, speak some English. So, if you've been, in any part of the world and you know a little bit of their language and they know a little bit of yours, and you do the same thing flying, you can kind of communicate. It's really neat. I mean, it's really aerobatics. I would say both at the U.S. level and the world level is like a big family.
With your involvement with the IAC, being on the board of directors, is that sort of the pathway that took you to the EIA board as well?
Well, yeah, I did. Yeah, I joined the board in I think 2004, the IAC board, and I think I joined the EIA board in 2005. So, yeah, it helped. And back then, Tom Poveresny was also an aerobatic pilot.
Right.
So I think Tom was a little bit comfortable with another aerobatic pilot coming on the board,
Have there been any, there have been a lot of highlights that have happened to EIA since, 2005, but are there some that sort of stand out in your memory as a board member, something, things that you can point to be very proud of?
My very first board meeting, one of our board members, his name was Vern Rayburn, and Vern was the founder of Eclipse Aviation, and he's a very intelligent man, and he was also in the computer industry too. He and I hadn't met until we went on the board, or until I came on the board. But Vern, I will never forget, said that I'd like to ask the board a couple of questions, if I may. And Tom gave him the floor. And so he says, how many in the board? And I think we had at that time maybe close to 50 board members, big board. How many of you, please raise a hand, use email? Well, virtually every hand went up. He says, well, that's good. And now, how many of you use Google search? Well, some hands went up. How many of you use Facebook? Almost no hands went up. How many of you are members of AOPA? And almost every hand went up. And he said, well, here we are as a board trying to attract the next generation as members to EAA, and most of us, by the show of hands, are not on the social media that the young next generation, and it's not one's right behind us, it's actually now two behind us, or three maybe. And now what that precipitated was when I came home, I said to myself, I think I better go on Facebook. And, I think we've tried to get younger board members as we go along as a result.
Well, and not only did you embrace social media, but you have your own YouTube channel where you have some videos that we've seen of you flying your Lancer Legacy.
Yes, I've just started that, and I should probably give thanks before you ask to COVID-19 for getting this to happen. Because anyway, it's been a lot of fun learning how to do this. Selecting the cameras. First of all, I just started with one. Up in the front of the canopy here. And then I very quickly, after the first vlog that I made, put two more in the airplane, which, just enhances, I think, the viewage for the person looking at it. And, but trying to research what kind of camera you should have and who it should be from and so forth and so on. It was an interesting experience. And to make it short, I ended up getting Garmin Verb 30 cameras. And one of the reasons I did that was that I have a complete Garmin panel in my Legacy, and I wanted the cameras to be able to interface where appropriate with the panels. And so I've been very, very pleased with them. I think they're basically, I won't say a knockoff to GoPro, but I could have done GoPros also, but that's been fun. And then, so that's one aspect. Next one is, you got to shoot stuff and you kind of, and then you got to edit it. And in the course of doing this, as you probably well know, and probably have to edit most of the stuff that we say out, but sometimes in editing stuff out, now all of a sudden I lost the verbiage that I had for a certain scene that I wanted the audience to see. And I have not yet learned how to do the voiceovers, but that'll be in my future. So yeah, that's been a lot of fun.
That's great. And if you need some voiceover tips, just let me know. We've got, you can't see it here, but there's a myriad of wires and things going into the computer that make the audio work. So it's not as hard as it looks. But I can't remember the name of the YouTube that I watched. It was a cross country flight. But it also had the readout of altitudes, airspeed, and is that the interface with the Garmin?
Yeah, the Garmin editor is very nice. In fact, I think GoPro even recommends to a lot of the people using their action cameras to go edit with the Garmin editor.
Okay. And
there's a whole bunch of things that you can select from, to put on the screen. And a lot of the action cameras are used by bikers, as an example, or hikers, or skydivers, or whatever. So they're interested in different metrics of the sport that they're in. And anyway, Garmin seems to have a lot of those that are very easy to select, and then all you do is just select them. Because when the camera is logging the videography, it's also logging, the GPS location, the time, how fast. Well, I don't know if it's how fast. They probably calculate that, but every second, let's just say that logs your GPS location, so they can calculate the time and distance and altitude and all that kind of stuff. And I think it makes it more interesting particularly for someone who's not a pilot, to see the data that's on the screen there.
Well, good. If you have a moment, those who are watching, go search for Norm's channel. He's got some videos up there, and you can see exactly what he's talking about. I thought it was a wonderful addition to your video, and really enjoyed it. We've been talking for a few minutes here, but what have I missed? Any stories that you want to share, or any things you're looking forward to coming up in the future for EIA or IAC?
Well, what's on the top of my mind right at the moment is is really this YouTube channel and doing vlogs from the flights that I take. And, as I sit here today, I think back of, without blowing my own horn, but I guess I am blowing my own horn. I've flown in all 50 states, in 4 or 5 of the Canadian provinces, and then down in Mexico. And I don't really have a lot of pictures that I took the time to take back then. And I saw you show a few that I'd sent on. One of them is the Legacy sitting on the ramp up in Nunavik, Northwest Territories of Canada. So that's maybe 90 miles north of the Arctic Circle, close to the Mackenzie River, which flows south to north into the Bering Sea. And it was just another goal that I had to go up to this village. It's half First Nation people, or Eskimos as we would call them in the States, but since we weren't in the States, are First Nation folks. And that was quite an experience. And real quickly, I stopped at Yellowknife on the way up because Buffalo Joe from Ice Pilots is headquartered there.
Right.
And I decided I'd go over and meet Buffalo Joe and just say hello and maybe get any tips on flying from Yellowknife on up to Nunavik. And he was very pleasant and nice enough to take me over to his chief pilot. And the chief pilot says, well, you kind of go west, about 100 miles, and then you'll see the river, and then follow the river up, which, is basically it. But I decided that, if anything went wrong, what I would do is put the plane down on the road next to the river, like we would have here in the States, Well, there aren't any roads next to the river until you get about maybe 50 miles out of Nunavik, and then you could land there. But anywhere in between, you're in the boonies. Yeah. So that was fun. And I'll, maybe just give you another quickie. And this was 4 years ago, maybe. My wife came with me to AirVenture, and I'd gone through my logbook and found out there were 17 states that I'd never landed in. And most of them were on the East Coast and in the Southeast. So after AirVenture, we got in the airplane and went out and knocked them off. And so that's where you see the hand up. That's supposed to be 5-0. It doesn't really show up that well, but that one. That was in Blytheville, Arkansas, which was the 50th state. And then the next day, I flew all the way back to California from Blytheville, and which shows you the speed and the range. Well, it's not nonstop, but at least the speed of the Legacy, which is a great airplane. But it's been interesting for me to reflect back over my 56 years of flying, that my interests have changed over the years. Probably a lot of our members have had the same thing. But, early on, we traveled off for weekend getaways within the state of California. Then I had a seaplane for a while, which was fun. And then, we went into the very easy and then building an airplane and then doing aerobatics, and now back to flying cross country. So I love doing the cross country flights, 2-3 hour legs. And every chance I get, I fly the airplane back to the board meetings and AirVenture.
Well, and speaking of AirVenture, we'll look forward to seeing you in person next year at AirVenture 2021. Norm DeWitt has been our guest. He's a member of the EAA Board of Directors, home builder, aerobatic pilot, and I think we'll call you a raconteur as well, because you do spin some good stories. And I appreciate you taking time and sharing some of those stories with us today.
Thank you, Steve.